Hello, everyone. Tu Diep went looking for answers, and she found them. But answers have a way of leading to more questions. Today, her mother is coming to her home for the very first time, and somewhere in the middle of soup, old photographs, and the things families never say out loud, Tu Diep discovers that healing is not as simple as showing up. Let's find out what happens next. 2 weeks after Haiti, Tu Diep invites her mother to come on a Sunday. Just lunch. Low pressure. Easy to end early if it becomes too much. That is what she tells herself the night before. While she cannot sleep, the morning of the visit, Tu Diep cleans a house that is already clean. James watches her from the doorway. He does not say anything. He knows better by now. He makes coffee instead, sets a cup on the counter where she will find it. Nai comes out of her bedroom, still in her pajamas. Hair going in 4 directions. Button tucked under her arm. Is she here yet? Not yet. Noon. What do I call her? Tu Diep stops wiping the counter. She has not thought about this. What do you want to call her? She asks. Nai thinks it over with great seriousness. Can I call her Grandma? Thing moves through Tu Diep's chest. Old and complicated. Yes, she says. You can call her that? Nai nods, satisfied, and goes back to her room. At noon exactly, a taxi stops in front of the house. Tu Diep watches from the window. Her mother steps out slowly. She's wearing a pale blue dress. Her gray hair is neatly pinned. She holds a small cloth bag in both hands. She stands on the sidewalk and looks up at the house. She looks afraid. Tu Diep recognizes that look. She saw it in her own reflection that morning, before she can move. Nai pushes past her and opens the front door. Grandma! Her mother's face changes completely. The fear disappears. Something warmer and more vulnerable takes its place. You must be Nai, she says. I have Button. Nai holds up the stuffed rabbit. I wanted to show you. He looks very well cared for. I fix his ear every morning. It keeps coming loose. Her mother smiles. He always had that problem. James made a simple lunch. Rice, braised pork, a bowl of clear broth. Tu Diep's mother ate slowly and complimented everything twice. She was polite and careful with James. Called him by name. Asked about his work with genuine curiosity. James was easy with her. He is easy with most people. It is one of the things Tu Diep has always loved about him. Ni talked without pausing. She described her classroom, her teacher who smelled like peppermint, her best friend Lynn who cried at her birthday party because the cake had the wrong flavor, and the exact process by which she had decided that Button's full name was Button James Nguyen. Her mother listened to every word. She asked questions. She laughed in the right places. Tu Diep watched her and thought, she is good at this, at listening, at making a child feel heard. She was not always this way, or perhaps she was, and Tu Diep simply never got to see it. After lunch, Nai fell asleep on the couch. It happens quickly at 6 years old. One moment she's explaining the plot of a cartoon, and the next she is gone. Breathing slowly, Button pressed to her cheek. James quietly excused himself. Tu Diep and her mother sat at the kitchen table with the last of the tea. She is remarkable, her mother said. She has your stubbornness. Tu Diep looked up. Her mother was smiling gently. You used to make decisions the same way, very seriously, like the fate of the world depended on getting the name right. Tu Diep did not know what to do with that. The idea that her mother remembered her at 6 years old. She looked down at her tea. I have something for you, her mother said. She reached into the cloth bag and placed a photograph on the table. Old. faded at the corners. A young woman holding a small baby, laughing at someone off camera. Tu Diep stared at it. The young woman could not be more than 22. Her hair was loose. Her face was open and unguarded in the way that people are before life closes them down. She recognized her slowly. "That is you," Tu Diep said. "Yes, and that is you. 4 months old." Tu Diep picked up the photograph carefully. The way you handle something that might break. She had never seen a photograph of herself as a baby, never seen her mother this young, never seen that expression on her mother's face. Pure, uncomplicated joy. "You kept this. I kept everything I had. There was not much." Her mother's voice was steady, but only just. "But I kept it. Why are you giving it to me now?" "Because it was always yours." The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, a car passed. A neighbor's dog barked once and stopped. Tu Diep set the photograph down. "I need to ask you something," she said, "and I need you to answer me honestly." Her mother nodded. "All right." James's mother, Margaret, she was the one who found you. She came to Hate and asked questions until she found Mrs. Lang, until she found you. Tu Diep paused. "Did you know she was looking?" Her mother was quiet for a moment too long. "Mom?" "Yes," her mother said quietly. "I knew." Tu Diep felt the air go out of her. "She told you someone was looking for me, looking for my family, and you didn't say anything." "I didn't know how. Well, that was 3 years ago." "I know. 3 years. Mom, Nai was 3 years old. I have been married for 8 years. You knew someone was trying to reach you, and you still waited." "So." Her mother pressed her hands flat on the table. "I was scared. I know that is not a good enough answer, but it is the true one. Every time I thought about reaching out, I imagined you turning me away. I imagined your face when you opened the door, and I could not bear it. Oh. So instead you made the choice for me." "Yes." Tu Diep stood up. She needed to move. She walked to the kitchen window. She looked out at the small garden James had planted. The herbs in their clay pots, the single rose bush that Nai had insisted on, and that James had carried home on his bicycle. Her ordinary life. Her good life. 3 years closer to this moment. If her mother had said yes, "I understand being afraid." Tu Diep said finally, "I stood outside your door for 10 minutes before I knocked. I understand it." She turned around. "But you cannot keep making decisions about what I can and cannot handle. I am not 6 years old anymore. I haven't been for a long time." Her mother looked at her across the kitchen. "You are right," she said simply. "I am sorry." Not a complicated apology. Not a long explanation. Just those 3 words, said plainly. To the woman standing by the window, Tu Diep let out a slow breath. "I know," she said. "I know you are." She came back to the table. She sat down. She picked up her tea even though it had gone cold. "Next time something happens," Tu Diep said, "you call me. You do not decide for me. You call me. I will. I mean it. I know you do. I will." From the other room came the sound of Nai shifting in her sleep, murmuring something, settling. Well, again, they both listened until the house went quiet. Then Tu Diep said, "Tell me something about when I was small, something I wouldn't know." Her mother looked at her for a long moment. Then she began to talk. "Here's what I learned that afternoon. The people who hurt us are not always strangers to love. Sometimes they love deeply and are simply too afraid to act on it, too convinced they will get it wrong, too certain they are not wanted. That does not excuse the choices they made, but it helps explain them. Tu Diep did not forget what her mother had done that afternoon. She did not set it aside. She held it alongside everything else. The photograph, the stories, the stuffed rabbit. She held all of it at once, and she decided to stay at the table. The Sunday visits continued, once a month, always at noon. Her mother always arrived exactly on time, always with something small in her cloth bag, a piece of fruit, a jar of homemade jam, a packet of the tea she knew Tu Diep liked. She never arrived empty-handed. She never stayed past 4 o'clock. She was learning the shape of her place in this family, how much space to take up, how much to leave. Nai looked for her at the window every Sunday morning. Is she here yet? Not yet. Is she here yet? Nai, I'm just asking. Then one Thursday, James came home from work and found Tu Diep sitting at the kitchen table with her phone in her hand. What happened? Mrs. Lan called. My mother was in the hospital. Her heart. She's home now. She didn't want me to know. James sat down across from her. She was alone. Tu Diep said, she was in the hospital, and she thought she should handle it by herself, so she wouldn't be a burden to me. She's been alone a long time. I know, but she doesn't have to be anymore. That is what I am trying to tell her. Tu Diep pressed her hands together on the table. She still doesn't believe she has the right to need things. James was quiet for a moment. My mother was the same way after my father died. He said, for 2 years she wouldn't ask us for anything. She thought needing help meant she had failed somehow. Tu Diep looked at him. What changed? We just kept showing up, whether she asked or not. Eventually, she understood that we weren't coming out of obligation. We were coming because we wanted to. Tu Diep thought about this. She called her mother that evening. You should have called me, she said. When her mother picked up, I didn't want to worry you. Mom, listen to me carefully. Tu Diep kept her voice steady. You are allowed to need things. You are allowed to call me when you are frightened. You are not a burden. Do you understand? It's Collins on the other end. I am not sure I know how to do that, her mother said finally. Her voice was very small. I know. We will figure it out together. But you have to try. All right. Good. Now tell me exactly what the doctor said. The following Sunday, Tu Diep did not wait for her mother to come to them. She packed a container of chicken and rice soup, warm and simple. The kind her mother had always liked, loaded Nai and James into the car, and drove to Hate. Her mother opened the door and stood very still. We thought you might like company at home today. Tu Diep said. Ni held up button. I brought him so you could see him. He missed you. Her mother stepped back to let them in. The small house felt different with 4 people in it. Warmer, less quiet. James set up the food on the small table. Nai gave a careful tour of the house to Button, explaining each piece of furniture in a low and serious voice. Tu Diep's mother sat in her chair and watched all of this. After a while, Tu Diep noticed her mother's expression. Not happy exactly, something deeper than happy. Something that looked like relief. Like a woman who had spent 20 years believing she did not deserve this, slowly beginning to accept that she had it anyway. Later, when Ni had fallen asleep across James's lap and the soup pot was empty, Tu Diep sat beside her mother on the small step outside the front door. The street was quiet. The evening light was long and gold across the pavement. I want to ask you something. Tu Diep said. Ask. Ni's birthday is in 2 months. We are having a small party, just family. A pause. I would like you to come. Her mother turned to look at her. As family, Tu Diep said, not as a guest. Her mother was quiet for a long moment. I don't know if I deserve that. She said, probably not yet. Tu Diep said honestly, but we have to start somewhere. Her mother nodded slowly. Then yes, I would very much like to come. They sat together on the step as the light changed. Neither of them spoke for a while. There was no need. Here is what I have learned. Across all of this, families are not built only in the good years. Sometimes they are built in the repair, in the returning, in the choosing over and over to try again. Tu Diep still carries the years her mother was not there. She always will. But she also has this now, a Sunday afternoon. A pot of soup, a little girl explaining furniture to a stuffed rabbit while 2 women sit on a step and watch the light go gold. You cannot get the lost years back, but you can decide what the next years look like. Tu Diep decided, and that, I think, is the most courageous thing a person can do. Take care, everyone, and thank you for watching.